Hey everyone, it's 10 Types, and today I'm going to be going over 5 mechanics that I think could be really cool to see brought back for next year. Most of these are mechanics that aren't in the game. The one's actually really complicated, and I am going to be grouping a few together. But we're going to start off with Radiant Pokemon, which are Pokemon that are currently in the game. Obviously, Radiant Greninja, if you play the Pokemon TCG, you know it's one of the best Pokemon in the game. It's not broken or the best, but it's very highly played. And Radiant Pokemon, you can only play one Radiant Pokemon in your deck. We also saw the Star mechanic. We'll talk about Prism Stars later, but there are Pokemon Star, which are pretty much just like Radiant Pokemon. Ace Spec cards are kind of like Radiant Pokemon as well, except they're trainers or there's a handful of special energy Ace Specs as well, but Radiant Pokemon are actually Pokemon, and I'd be shocked if we saw Ace Spec Pokemon. So Radiant Pokemon are kind of cool theoretically. Radiant Greninja was just so much better than all the rest. So there were 15. I'm not going to go through all of them, but Radiant Greninja is the only one with an ability that lets you. It is the only universal card that can be put into any deck and get decent value. And its attack's decent. A lot of the other Radiant Pokemon are probably about as good as Radiant Greninja as an attacker, to be honest. Radiant Hisuian Sneasler is kind of fun. It's been good within Cloth to Rakdos, and apparently it was played in Eternatus some. I honestly don't remember that. And Radiant Charizard has definitely been good. Radiant Charizard is a good Radiant Pokemon. It's a good tech Pokemon, and it doesn't feel broken. It feels, I mean, if it was just a regular Pokemon, it would be broken, but it's not. Radiant Pokemon are a way for Pokemon to create different Pokemon that are stronger than regular Pokemon, and also give Pokemon that are basics to Pokemon that don't normally have basics, like Venusaur. I guess Venusaur has some basics, but I don't think Sarina has any other basics. Wait, no, that has other basics. Uh, these all might have basics. I'm not sure, but regardless, you have. Oh, I guess no. I wasn't like saying a lot of them have basic V's. So regardless, that doesn't really matter. But it is cool to see some Pokemon have basics that don't normally have it and have shiny Pokemon, and that's cool. But ultimately, Radiants are cool because they're just different Pokemon on a different power level that are still fair. And if Pokemon balanced them better, I think they would have been super cool. A lot of them are pretty niche. For example, Radiant Gardevoir and Radiant Charjabug only interact with Pokemon V, which certainly were good when these cards were printed. But I mean, Radiant Charjabug was printed in Crown Zenith, so literally the next expansion, like a month later or two. I don't remember exactly how much later, but the next expansion, and this was a mini expansion, so it wasn't a full like set later. It was a mini set gap, and so it was essentially meaningless for uh, its entire time in standard, which is kind of disappointing. Radiant Eternatus puts VMAXs directly into play. It's a really weird card. It's been played a tiny bit for attacking as well. It's a really weird card, but it's cool, and a lot of them are really cool. And we only saw 15 comparing that to Ace Specs, and we've seen a bunch of those, and they've been cool. They've been meaningful. There is obviously Prime Catcher is pretty clearly the best one, and there's a few that are at the top, but the weaker ones do end up seeing play as well and are fun in their own decks. And Radiant Pokemon could do a similar thing, and I'd love to see them back. And Pokemon are generally cooler than trainers, so that'd be something. Not necessarily a specific reason to see these printed this year. This is this is on New Year, so this year, but we could see. I expect to see some mechanic and some mechanic that's not as major. Obviously, Radiant Pokemon can only affect the metagame so much because you can only play one per deck. So I guess if there's one that's really centralizing, it could change things substantially. But realistically, like Radiant Greninja, despite being a very good card, even at its peak, it was never really a game-defining card. It was, I guess, a pretty scary attacker for some decks if you didn't want to play Manaphy. And there's some ways to get around Manaphy, but ultimately not that game defining, but just a bunch of really cool Pokemon that could be even cooler if Pokemon decided to expand them. The mechanic that I like a little more than the Radiant Pokemon is the Prism Star mechanic. This is kind of like the Ace Spec or the Radiant or the Star mechanic, things like that. But instead, and I'll read out the rule, it says you can't have more than one Prism Star card with the same name in your deck. So you just have one copy of each. But for example, playing Shaman Prism Star means you can just play one of that, but you can still play Tapu Koko Prism Star. It's not like playing one gatekeeps the other. A lot of the other Radiants aren't terrible, but they are outclassed by something like a Radiant Greninja. But They also aren't super specific, so there aren't too many there are decks that would play Radiant Charizard and Radiant Greninja, or four Radiant Greninja if you could. But if they were Prism Stars, I think they would work maybe a little better. Obviously, having Radiant Hisuian Sneasler and Radiant Blastoise and Radiant Greninja and Radiant Charizard all in the same deck gets kind of crazy, but I don't know if that would break the game or anything like that. But regardless, Prism Star Pokemon are a little weaker because they have a less serious restriction. They also do have this restriction. They are one-ofs with the Radiant, or no, with Radiant Charizard. I guess that's some more main attacker than Radiant Greninja. If that's discarded, you can get it back. But then that's like, you're playing multiple copies essentially at that point, or maybe it's prized and then you can't get it. You could get it with Issue and Heavy Ball, but you might not necessarily have access to that. So you will just generally have access to it a bunch of times or no times if things never go your way. The Prism Star Pokemon you have access to one time. They could be prized just like the Radiance, but they get lost zoned when instead of discarded. This means you can't reuse them. Tapu Koko Prism Star, for example, has this ability it discards itself. Well, no, I guess it lost zones itself. If it discarded itself, it would lost zone itself. So they're the same thing, but you can just use its ability once. It's a strong ability and really good for lightning decks. When it was in format, it was very good. I wouldn't say it was format defining. The lightning deck Pikachu and Zekrom was defining, but not because of this card. Yes, it helped, but it didn't define it. And Thunder Mountain Prism Star was also another lightning support card, and you play these two, but you could theoretically just play one of them. You could do different things, and they are cool cards, but they're one-time use cards. Stadiums are a little different, but you can't get that stadium back. The stadiums also did have a special rule which said, I guess it wasn't a rule, but you can see here. It says whenever any player plays an item or support a card from their hand, prevent all effects of that card done to the stadium. This is to stop your opponent from, say, lost vacuuming it, or I guess more meaningfully. Also, sort of this background noise. There might be. But hopefully not. But regardless, if they played Field Blower it was like Lost Vacuum. It would discard the stadium. It wouldn't. This is stopping them from discarding it. It wouldn't get lost on. It wouldn't get discarded. And Lost Vacuum stop that. Stop that as well. Yeah, there's rain on my window, so I don't know if that's getting picked up. And it's also there might be fireworks. So regardless, you have a bunch of different ones of different types. You could play them together. You could play them separately. You could do weird things. And generally, they were pretty fun. Ditto Prism Stars, I think, an all-time cool card, letting you evolve into any Pokemon. And then you have just some weird ones. Jirachi Prism Star was part of a weird combo deck called Combo Zacian, which was just weird, quite frankly, but fun. Definitely cool. And then you had, well, I think it's cool, but then you also have like Cyrus Prism Star. Cyrus Prism Star might be a little problematic. Looks like the deck. So this is regular limitless TCG, and there is an expanded deck there is an expanded deck involving this card, but that involves Dialga V-Star, and there haven't really been expanded events since this card came out. Regardless, there are a lot of really interesting cards that do things that feel strong but fair. The one issue with why I don't think this mechanic will exactly come back is the Lost Zone mechanic isn't. It's in the game right now, but with rotation we'll be losing all Lost Zone cards. And generally, in terms of cards that we see with Lost Zone, you don't see these cards all the time. We see them like once every, I want to say like 10 years. I could be wrong about that. I guess there's Sword and Shield, and there was, I don't know when the first Lost Zone cards were. I know there was like Heart Gold Soul Silver era, there were Lost Zone cards, and there were Lost Zone cards in obviously this era. I mean, we're looking at Lost Zone cards. So there are some here, but then there also were, and there are cards now, but we're during like Black and White, X and Y. So I don't necessarily expect to see Lost Zone cards this year, or really ever, then I guess during Scarlet and Violet, but if we do, Prism Stars would be something awesome to see come back. If not, we could see a mechanic that's, as I said, just like Radiance, except we can play one of each Pokemon, so that could be an interesting thing. And, I expect a mechanic like this to come into the game, potentially with Legends ZA, where almost certainly, so Radiant Pokemon came from Legends Arceus, and I have no idea where Prism Star Pokemon came from, to be honest. And Radiant Pokemon, well, I said they came from that set. They were in the set Astral Radiance, which was based on Legends Arceus. The Arceus set wasn't based on Legends Arceus. It gets really complicated. I don't actually know. I don't play pay that much attention to the video game, but I believe they come from that. Then Brilliant Stars, I believe, was Brilliant Diamond Shining Pearl. But regardless, you have presumably some mechanic in addition to trainers Pokemon coming this year, and it could be a smaller mechanic like this. It could be something like, I was going to say Ultra Beast, but probably wouldn't be anything like that. That's more comparable to the Ancient and Future cards. However, the mechanic that I think I'd really love to see is Pokemon Break, which honestly they look, in my opinion, not very good. Especially on this page, they're sideways, which is kind of weird, and they all kind of look the same because they're all the same color. They're all golden. They're kind of cool, but in terms of playing them, they're really fun, and they are sideways. You turn them the regular ways you turn them so that they're facing the same direction as your Pokemon, and you see. I don't know if there's a way for me to turn the recording, but it has the attack, going the other way. You put it on top of the Pokemon, so that'll look like, say, this space that I've highlighted here would be the regular card, and you'd put the image of the Pokemon would be covered up by this card, so you could still read the text underneath it entirely. You wouldn't be able to see the HP. The HP is now covered up, and the new HP is the one here, like 130. Trying to see, yeah. So you'd have like some Bronzong. This would be paired with this Bronzong with Metal Links. It has 9 HP now. Its HP goes up to 130, and it still has the attack here. The ability you can still use, and now it has this other attack and higher HP. And it's also a higher stage. Keep in mind, well, this is a Pokemon. I believe this is an evolution, and it just evolves from Bronzong but it's not a stage 2. It's kind of comparable, kind of like how VMAX and V-Stars are not stage 1s, though they're very similar to stage 1s. They're technically not. It gets a little weird because Break Pokemon, like, they're all the same stage, but something like Carabing Break is really like a stage 1. Then Bronzong Break's kind of like a stage 2, and then Greninja Break, which is a bit infamous, is like a stage 3, so they're not really the same stage, but they are cool, allowing you to keep your previous evolution, do that stuff. And then the break rule says, I'm trying to read it and I'm tilting my head sideways. Greninja Break retains the attack's abilities, weakness, resistance, and retreat cost of its previous evolution. Okay, that's stuff I said. And then you also, like, you evolve, you're an evolution Pokemon, you're an evolved Pokemon. There's level X's, which are similar. I'm a little less familiar with level X's than Pokemon Break. They you can't play, I believe, like 4 copies of the level X in the baby or the regular Pokemon. And there are some different rules as to be in the active, just some different things. Ultimately, the idea is still the same, though, of you play the Pokemon on top, you retain the previous things. Pokemon Break are kind of cool. They take up physically extra space, which might be bad, but the details don't matter too much. Obviously, they matter for Pokemon, but for this discussion, they don't. They opened up really cool possibilities with evolution lines expanding upon them. They don't necessarily interact with the EX Pokemon. This was an era with the capital EX Pokemon, and you don't see any interaction with them, which might be a downside in terms of, like, you can't evolve a Break to evolve an EX to a Break, and so that doesn't work. Someone submitted some custom cards that were like Mega Pokemon, but really just Mega Pokemon in quotes. They were like Pokemon Break, except that they were called Mega EXs that evolved from the EXs. So Pokemon could do something like that as well. I would really love to see this. It's fun and just gives, as I said, a lot more depth to the evolution lines, assuming that they actually make the final evolution that's not the Break good, like the Yveltal, the Clawitzer. Has Clawitzer had any good cards? I don't think it has. The Clawitzer, the Talonflame, if those cards are good, or at least somewhat interesting, and then the Break on top of that is also good and interesting, then you have just added depth. I like Pokemon with lots of attacks or abilities, and that's cool. Pokemon also, so some of these have abilities, like Greninja. Break has an ability. Then within the Greninja deck, there's a within the Greninja, where's the Greninja with an ability? Just let me find one. Okay, there's a Greninja with an ability that's played some, I promise. There we go. I found it. The Water Shuriken Greninja. So you could have Greninja with Water Shuriken, and then also Giant Water Shuriken, and you could use both abilities, which is kind of fun. And so you could double up there, which is cool. And yeah, it's a thing. But regardless, you have that, and then you could have Pokemon with 2 abilities with ancient traits. Ancient traits are weird. So I'm looking at, as I said, Limitless TCG. I believe I said that earlier in the video, and they have good data. They count the Terra rule as, or the Terra thing. I don't know if it's a rule. They are rule box Pokemon because it's their the EX rule box, but I don't know if this is considered a rule. But regardless, it says as long as this Pokemon is on your bench, prevent all damage done to this Pokemon by attacks, both yours and your opponent's. So it stops your damage done to your own bench Terra Pokemon, which is like really the only meaningful difference between certain abilities. However, this isn't that interesting. All the Terra Pokemon have the same rule. It's not an ability, so it won't get shut off by ability lock, and this is what makes ancient traits interesting. I don't know what defines an ancient trait. When I think of ancient trait, it's like, oh, this is from Celebrations, but Mega Rayquaza EX, it's got this thing with a Greek letter, Delta Evolution, which says you can just evolve immediately. It's very similar to an ability. I made a video ranking mechanics, and I originally was very critical of these, and ultimately I think I wouldn't mind just seeing a second ability on cards. Yes, it does change with ability lock, and there is a Manectric, or a Regirock, which got played because of the ancient trait, because it's not an ability, which is meaningful, not like hugely meaningful, but definitely meaningful, and so that is a thing. But ultimately, the difference between them, ancient traits and abilities, isn't huge. However, as I was mentioning with breaks, you can get two abilities that way, but you can get two, essentially, if you treat these as abilities, you can have two abilities or an ability and two attacks. Right now, we just see Pokemon like, say, what's a Pokemon? Like Gardevoir EX, which has an ability and an attack, but it doesn't have anything else. And there aren't any Pokemon with three, as far as I'm aware, outside of, if you count something like Charizard EX, it has its ability, it has its attack, and then it also has its ancient trait thing, which isn't really an ancient trait, I don't think. Ultimately, I would really have loved to see the Terra mechanic actually have different effects, and that would be really cool. And then you'd see the different Ogerpons, for example, like Kill Master Ogerpon EX, it's so played, it's immune to bench damage. How much does that matter? Um, it doesn't really matter, to be honest, right? Like, it matters sometimes though, and it just annoys decks and reduces some decks viability, but it's not something that's really interesting. It's not a reason to play the card, and it doesn't really change your plays. Changes your opponent's plays a little, but it's not fun. I haven't really heard any good things said about it. I mean, yes, it obviously makes the card a little bit better, but it's not that much better, and it's kind of boring. Then also there are some other things here counted as ancient traits. There is the baby rule, which says that your opponent like flips a coin when they try to attack this. Where's the Cleffa? There's a Cleffa. I guess it's one per card. So there's like this Cleffa with this baby rule, and then there is also Pokemon with, I believe they're called held items. And you see that's a baby. Where's the Pokemon with held item? Like this one, and it has this thing that's essentially an ability, but it's not an ability. So I'd love to see, and then that theoretically allows Pokemon to have like extra attacks / abilities, and this is something that we could see. You could theoretically see Pokemon just with 3 attacks anyways. For example, I know there's a Machamp with 3 attacks. Pokemon GX also had 3 attacks. Okay, yeah, so we got this Machamp. Where's the Machamp with 3 attacks? This Machamp, it has 3 attacks, and that's kind of cool. And then you have, how far back does Limitless Database go? And then you have the GX Pokemon with 3 attacks. Just seeing 3 things on a Pokemon is cool, giving them more depth, and I'd love to see that with Pokemon. And as I said, the Terras currently don't really count. So ancient traits, ultimately what they are, they're not like super interesting. You have said there's the evolution one, there's plus where you can take an extra prize on knockout. That's not necessarily super exciting, or at least it's not necessarily super well viewed, and definitely not a mechanic people generally love, but certainly a decent card, or like it's good. I mean, it's strong, and it is somewhat interesting. And then there's a bunch of them. There's one, I believe this is the double tool one. Their abilities that are just like abilities, and that's fine. This one stops effects of abilities done to this Pokemon, things like that. So you just have different abilities essentially, right? You got this Altaria, which can evolve immediately, has its ability and has its attack, and this gives it, again, more things it can do, and that's interesting. Just having more stuff. One of my favorites, I guess, would be Omega Barrage. Bunnelby is an a really good card. Honestly, it's kind of insane. And especially with TMs, and it's the ancient trait, which is essentially an ability, says that you can attack twice. We've seen abilities essentially exactly like this on, I'll just say Diplin. Diplin doesn't have the exact same ability. You need a certain stadium, but having these extra things on the card is cool, and I would love to see ancient traits. I don't know if there's any reason for us to expect that. They could be, though. They could return with Legends DA, and that's kind of what I'm expecting this to correlate with, kind of just completely separate from the trainers Pokemon. The last type of Pokemon I'd be interested in seeing return, maybe Pokemon V Union or Pokemon Legends. Pokemon Legends are kind of cool because they have multiple Pokemon featured on them. Tag teams I think are like thematically cool because they allow you to just have multiple Pokemon on the same card. And so if you're a big fan of multiple Pokemon, seeing them on the same card is so cool. And that was fun. Ultimately, tag teams were super broken, which was the problem. People talk a lot about power creep, but there are some instances where you can point to and say, that right there, that's power creep. And one of those instances is tag teams, because they completely outclassed all the other non-tag team GXs. I played a lot during that era. I can't think of any good regular GXs outside of like Dedenne GX with its on playability, which isn't, it's the reason it's good is not its stats, it's just its ability. So I could see why people don't like tag teams. I actually do think there is something that could be done with tag teams. I think they could be okay if Pokemon does actually balance them, but ultimately they'd be more interesting if they are these combining Pokemon. One massive criticism I have of Legend Pokemon, or Pokemon Legend or whatever they're called, is that they're really hard to read. I mean, you can just look at it, it's sideways, but obviously if you turn, so in Pokemon TCG Online, they were essentially impossible to read because they were sideways and at weird angles, but the text is at weird angles even when turned the right way, and so that's really confusing. And also they weren't very good as far as I'm aware. I know there was one that was good. There was the Entei and Suicune, I want to say, or maybe it's no Entei and Raikou. I honestly don't remember which. Yeah, I think it's Entei and Raikou. It's the one in the Truth. It's a card. No, I think it's the Yeah, I don't remember what it is. I guess there were a few that were okay, but regardless, there are some that were like kind of interesting, kind of fun. I want to find. Oh, okay, it was the second. Okay, Suicune apparently Rayquaza Deoxys also got played, and Entei and Raikou. So a few of them got played. They have the same name, the two halves. They're like the same card, kind of. They're obviously different. Like these two cards look visually different, but they are the same like Pokemon and can only be played together. You could play, but they have the same names. You could play two of each, but I don't think people did. Um, I'm like not familiar with these. In case you can't tell from me just saying stuff, I don't really know too much about them. But like this one plays a 1/1 line, and um, this one was played as maybe also a 1/1. Let's see, that's 1/1. Yeah, so generally played as 1/1s because and then they're also not evolutions or basics, which is really weird. And same thing with Pokemon V Union, which we're going to talk more about. These are not like, so these you have four. So this piece goes here, and this piece we go here for the Greninja, and then you have each piece has at least one attack, I believe, and then some have abilities. Greninja had three of the four pieces had abilities. And Greninja V Union was the only good one, or no, Mewtwo V Union was the only good one. Greninja V Union was like okay, the rest were like kind of something. The big problem is because they do have this, or one of their big problems is they all have the same name. So then if you go and you like prize one, then you can't get it out with Hisuian and Heavy Ball, and you can only play one of each, so it's super sketchy to avoid prizing them all and drawing them, and then you can't search them out with anything against evolution Pokemon specifically or specifically basics because they're neither. And then also if they were knocked out, you couldn't return them. And they also gave up three prizes. The fact they gave up three prizes wasn't really annoying for your opponent. It's not like they were super broken. They were just not very good. Mewtwo V Union had some sketchy design with an attack. That's not the attack. With an attack that healed 200 from it. So theoretically, you could just set this up. And then if your opponent wasn't ever able to do more than 200 damage, you just attack with Super Regeneration over and over and just lose. But ultimately, it was kind of fun. Mewtwo V Union 1 setup was very strong, but it was cool as well. I definitely think it's a fun card, and I haven't really heard complaints about it, despite the fact that it was a control card that was a 3 prizer. And then the other ones are kind of cool. They all have this attack union game, which is kind of boring. Ultimately, I'd like to see them each have separate names, but potentially a really cool thing they could do is have four different like pieces, but then you just need to take one of each corner. It's one Pokemon on each card. So this would be a Greninja piece. This would be a Mewtwo piece. This would be a Morpeko piece, and this would be as in like this would have a Morpeko, the whole Morpeko, not just like its belly or whatever. This would have Mewtwo, all of Mewtwo, not just its head. Then you stick the four together, have this like quad tag team, or maybe dual tag team. You could mix and match and do something crazy like that. That'd be something. That'd be a lot, that might be really bad, but that seems like it could be kind of fun. And I'm interested in seeing what Pokemon does end up doing. I expect them to bring some mechanic like this back at some point in the future, though maybe not just yet. Ultimately, Mewtwo Reunion, or just the reunions as a whole, Mewtwo the only one that's good, were a disappointment. They were not meaningful in the metagame, and also they're really weird to pull because you don't want to open just this card. Like, what is this? This is some hand. So no one just wants a hand to open as a card, or like Zacian's like scarf. So ultimately they weren't in sets, so they just weren't really played at all. If they were in sets, they would have been played more, and they were really awkward. Also, they were played from the discard, so I think they should be like played from the hand or something. They had a lot of flaws, but being played from the discard might be better. Regardless, these were really interesting theoretically, and I'd love to see Pokemon bring back a mechanic like this, flesh it out some more. But there are a lot of mechanics that I'd love to see back in the game, and as I said, Pokemon is almost guaranteed to be bringing back some mechanic or bringing a new mechanic similar to one of these. Probably halfway through the year. Though we could see it in the first set of the year. We generally see a main mechanic, but then we also sometimes see a secondary mechanic. For example, we saw the Ace Backs, instead we saw the Radiance, we saw the Prism Stars, and this is during the third year, and that's Prime Catcher and the other Ace Backs were the second year, but Prime Catcher might have been the first year actually. But regardless, near the tail end of the second year. But I hope you enjoyed the video. Consider liking, subscribing, and hitting the bell. Tell me down below as well what you'd like to see coming this year in addition to Trainers Pokemon. But I hope you enjoyed, and as always, I'm excited to see you in the next video.